It's been a whirlwind weekend at the United Nations in New York, the General Assembly meeting for wave after wave of leaders' addresses, and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas delivering his speech on Friday, complete with dire deadlines and warnings.
وفي حال مواصلة سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لتكريس واقع الدولة العنصرية الواحدة كما يجري اليوم، فإن شعبنا الفلسطيني والعالم بأسره لن يقبل بذلك، وستفرض المعطيات والتطورات على الأرض الحقوق السياسية الكاملة والمتساوية للجميع على أرض فلسطين التاريخية في دولة واحدة. وفي كل الأحوال على إسرائيل أن تختار. هذه هي الخيارات أمامها وعليها أن تختار.
Speaking via video link with a long since debunked series of maps in the background, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas once again repudiating Israel and calling for two-state negotiations to resume at once, unless Israel wants to absorb the Palestinian population as well as all the disputed territories. But the call for diplomacy followed with a heavy precondition, Abbas giving Israel 1 year to negotiate a withdrawal to the 1967 armistice lines, including from East Jerusalem, or else the PA will rescind its recognition of Israel.
أمام سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي عام واحد لتنسحب من الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة منذ عام 67 بما فيها القدس الشرقية، ونحن على استعداد للعمل خلال هذا العام على ترسيم الحدود وإنهاء جميع قضايا الوضع النهائي تحت رعاية اللجنة الرباعية الدولية وفق قرارات الشرعية الدولية. وفي حال عدم تحقيق ذلك، لماذا يبقى الاعتراف بإسرائيل قائما على أساس حدود عام 67؟ لماذا يبقى هذا الاعتراف؟
Abbas's threats seemingly falling on deaf ears, though. Abbas is becoming increasingly unpopular among his own constituency, and Israeli authorities are calling Abbas on his bluff. Defense Minister Gantz, for one, commending the call for political solutions, but saying that with this ultimatum, Abbas has climbed a tall tree that will be difficult to climb down from, adding that it's important to remember that no one is going anywhere and that we must deal in reality. Meanwhile, in said reality, Israel celebrating and expanding its partnerships across the region and the world. New reports showing that Foreign Minister Yair Lapid held multiple secret meetings with Jordanian leadership over the past month, and the United States approving of $1 billion in Iron Dome aid, practically overnight and with an overwhelming majority of bipartisan support. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett among the many thanking the United States for their partnership ahead of his own speech at the UN scheduled for Monday.
אני יוצא עכשיו לעצרת הכללית של האומות המאוחדות. זאת במה בינלאומית חשובה, ואני מאוד שמח על ההזדמנות להביא את הקול של ישראל, של הישראלים, באותה במה חשובה. זאת הזדמנות לספר את הסיפור שלנו על המקום של ישראל במרחב, על הרוח המיוחדת של הישראלים ועל התרומה שלנו לעולם. בזמן האחרון היו כמה רגעים חשובים, בראשם הניצחון הגורף בהצבעה בבית הנבחרים האמריקנים. אנחנו ראינו שברגע האמת נציגי העם האמריקני תומכים תמיכה גורפת 420 מול 9 בישראל באותה הצבעה על החימוש מחדש של כיפת הברזל. יש קבוצה קטנה אנטי-ישראלית שעושה הרבה רעש, אבל החבר'ה האלה נכשלו. תראו, אנחנו לא מגדירים את עצמנו לפי אחרים, לא לפי איראן ולא הפלסטינים. בכלל אני מציע למנהיגים שלהם לעסוק באנשים שלהם, בשיפור המצב שלהם, ולהפסיק באובססיה הזאת למדינת ישראל.
In other news, the effects of normalization with Israel starting to snowball in Sudan, and Sudan hasn't even fully ratified the accords on their end yet. Authorities in Khartoum closing the door on Hamas's financial network that's long been embedded in the African country. And this as the latest part of Sudan's efforts to have sanctions lifted and stay off of the United States state sponsors of terrorism list. According to reports, officials from a task force charged with dismantling the previous Bashir regime have confiscated Hamas's holdings, including real estate, company shares, a hotel in the capital, an exchange bureau, a television station, and more than 1 million acres in farmland. Joining me now to discuss the consequences of this crackdown is Middle East expert and lecturer with Bar Ilan University, Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Dr. Kedar, it's a pleasure to have you back with us. Now, the extent of this network surprised many, and no doubt Hamas will be affected greatly. But to what degree will this effect be, and how will the effects show up down the line?
Well, this hoard of assets which belong to Hamas is only the tip of the iceberg. And the iceberg actually are the assets of Iran in Sudan. And this is something which I have not yet seen being toppled by the new regime in Sudan. When I see that the Sudanese government cracks on the Iranian assets in Sudan, I will believe that they actually changed the direction totally. After all, Hamas was there thanks to the influence of Iran in Sudan. And just to remind you, Israel allegedly attacked at least once some factories of Iran which were built on the Sudanese soil in order to export weapons to Gaza. And those factories did not belong to Hamas. They actually worked for Hamas. But the one who ran those factories was Iran. So I first want to see what happens with the Iranian assets in addition to the Hamas assets in Sudan.
All right, well, again, speaking of these assets, Hamas is arguing that it has no connection to the assets that were seized and is demanding that they be returned to the private individuals under whose name these assets are given. And Abbas, Palestinian Authority President Abbas, is similarly claiming that the Palestinian Authority is actually entitled to these assets. Do either of these claims have any merit, and what do you expect to come out from that?
Well, definitely, an organization like Hamas cannot register things on its name because it criminalizes itself and the people who are registered. Always. Terror organizations are hiding behind companies, behind organizations, behind individuals. And this is why it is not so easy, in many cases, to trace the threads of the ownership of these assets. Apparently, the Sudanese government spent some time and effort in order to find those threads. And they found what they found. Of course, Hamas will deny in order not to incriminate itself.
All right, now there have been multiple coup attempts in Sudan in recent months. Pro-Bashir factions are still fairly influential. How stable is the Sudanese government going forward as they come closer to the Abraham Accords?
Well, there is an even bigger question: to what extent Sudan as a state is stable as a state? Don't forget that like almost 10 years ago, Sudan was divided to two countries, Sudan and South Sudan. And the main problems remained in both countries. The multiple situation of many tribes, hundreds of tribes, ethnic groups, religions, languages. It's not only Arabs or Christians as it was between the North and the South. The divisions are deep in the society of Sudan. Sudan was an artificial state which was created by the British some 70, 80 years ago. And the main problem of Sudan is the cohesiveness or the lack of cohesiveness of the society in Sudan. And what you see as coup here and coup there is only the result of the social divides inside the Sudanese government, which are still alive and kicking, if not also alive and killing.
All right, so major obstacles still to come, it seems, or lying in the road ahead. Dr. Kedar, thank you so much. Now, speaking of peace in the Middle East, Israel and notable citizens of Iraq extending their hands towards one another in peace. Prime Minister Bennett today applauding and reciprocating the courage of some 300-plus notable Iraqis who called for normalization with Israel and the recognition of crimes against Iraqi Jews over the weekend. Organizers also claiming that, in fact, some 90% of Iraqis actually support making peace with Jerusalem. The unprecedented event taking place in Erbil in the Kurdish region of Iraq, and the guest list including Sunnis and Shiites, youth activists, local and tribal leaders, Iraqi Culture Ministry official Dr. Sahar Altai, and even Hemi Peres, son of late Israeli President Shimon Peres, who spoke via video call. Despite the inspiring turnout, though, the Iraqi government's swift to issue condemnations and arrest warrants for the conference's organizers and attendees. So what comes next with the analysis? Research fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at the IDC Herzliya and former senior staff member in the U.S. Congress, Dr. Fadi Esmail. Dr. Esmail, it's a pleasure to have you with us again. Now, do you think that it's true that 90% of Iraq wants to normalize?
Well, we can't know how many people in Iraq would like to normalize, but it is not really the issue now, is it? It's the event itself is very impressive. It is something that we could not have imagined several years ago, and the main challenge will be to see what will come next. I have seen at least one more event of this kind that took place about 2 years ago. With the Libyan government, but again, the problem is we have these events, and then the naysayers kick in and they start putting hurdles in front of the effort. It will be one thing I want to say is, from what I understand from several colleagues, is that this event is a culmination, or came as a culmination, of efforts done by many people over a period of time. Some say a period of years. In an attempt to create this kind of coming out of basically these are relationships that have been developed over several years, and now we see the outcome. The question is, what will happen next? Now, as far as the Iraqi government issuing the Supreme Court, they're issuing these arrest warrants and so on. You know, when we say it's really the Iranian government, we have the Iraqi political structure is heavily controlled by Iranian activists or Iranian operatives. So that actually cannot tell us much about what is the sentiment in the Iraqi street. One thing we have learned is that it seems to be that in the last few years, the Arab streets in different countries is surprisingly open to a dialogue of some sort with Israel. We have seen it, we've seen, of course, the Abraham Accords that exposed part of that reality. As I said, we've seen it with the Libyans. Only a couple of days ago, I had a conversation with somebody from Algeria that claims that in the Algerian street, there are many people who are talking in a similar language. It is very hard to know, though, because these governments, the local governments, are either controlled by what's called the axis of resistance, or feel beholden to it in some way.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but how do we then move this forward? How do we support the members of this conference, or the attendees of this conference, and the voices who were present there? How do we overcome the hurdles that are in the way between a normalization with Iraq, especially when the powers that be, as you insinuated, are very much against it?
Well, the thing it's many people that have to work all the time and not back off. That's the thing. I have to say that one of the most impressive individuals in this regard is the Iraqi Member of Parliament, Mithali al-Alusi, who was basically the pioneer in this effort. He came to Israel to visit Israel several years back, and as a result, both of his boys were killed in Iraq. They killed 2 of his children, yet he still came again to visit, and I had the distinct honor of meeting him. This is what it takes. It takes that kind of openness, that kind of courage, and it takes an Israeli side that is flexible, ready.
All right, well, we know that at least from Israel's side, as I mentioned earlier, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and many other officials have already outstretched their arms and congratulated the courage of these individuals who are there. As you said, they are courageous. So we hope for the best, and we'll stay tuned on this story for more. Dr. Ismail, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Moving on, the Israeli Defense Forces seemingly working overtime in recent weeks. 5 terrorists linked to a Hamas terror cell in the West Bank killed in a large-scale arrest raid conducted by the Duvdevan Counter-Terrorism Unit and the Israeli Border Police. And Prime Minister Bennett praising security forces for foiling what apparently could have been an imminent terror attack being planned by the cell. Here with the details, ILTV reporter Asaf Nissan. Asaf, thanks so much for joining us. Now, what happened during this raid?
First of all, Aaron, great as always to be here. What we heard overnight were 2 areas, pretty much the major Jenin area and the major Amal area. Both of them were targeted by the IDF, by the Duvdevan unit and the border police itself. They were on the fact that it turns out there's a terrorist cell there, not only a small one, but a very well-infrastructured Hamas terrorist cell that's been orchestrated and built throughout the last year. Now, this was actually part of the work Israel was trying to prevent with Operation Weed Whacking, in other names, pretty much. Yeah.
All right.
And over and all, I mean, you see there was a successful operation trying to root out all of Hamas's terror infrastructure. But from what they found, especially recently, it's still a wide and strong infrastructure, which is hard to pretty much take out in a single strike. This is going to be a long and over-expected operation. And I'm seeing this continuing for the next few weeks at least.
What are some of the reactions that you're seeing in the West Bank to these raids and to the assassination, you could call it, of these Hamas operatives?
Well, the responses are not coming from the West Bank per se, much more from the south. We're seeing Hamas and the PIJ, which actually apparently, according to recent reports, one of those who died is actually part of the PIJ. So exactly, both organizations are talking about retaliation against Israel. With Hamas, we're expecting, of course, rockets, and with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, we're expecting rockets. But the more illuminating and scary response was from PIJ saying, dark days await Israel. So it's pretty much funny to say that we're expecting more response from Hamas, but then again, the PIJ has been known to be very rogue and very hard forthcoming responses.
We know that they were very active with the previous war.
Exactly.
Operation Protective Edge. Now, it's been 100 days plus since the establishment of the Bennett-Lapid government. Do we see a difference in the way that they've been operating against terror in the West Bank, against Gaza, etc., as opposed to the Netanyahu government?
So far, I would say the new government has done a good job. Again, there is the issue that we have the same defense minister in both administrations, especially in the last 2. But then
Leadership
again,
makes a difference.
Then again, yeah. When you had Netanyahu, it's one hand, and of course Bennett's on the other. But we're seeing in the last 100 days a lot of pros and cons in each, and especially in the Bennett government, dealing with the escape of the prisoners from Kere Gilboa, which cost the taxpayers a lot of money on the one hand. But then again, you have Operation Guardian of the Walls, and of course all the recent attacks and foiled attempts by...
To be fair, at least with the Gilboa escape, it looks like they've been working on that tunnel for a lot longer than Bennett's been in office.
Well, that's true.
but we'll put that aside. What could we expect, again, from Hamas in the near future? Are we expecting... I mean, I know that you alluded, especially with Palestinian Islamic Jihad as well, to potential rocket attacks or increased aggression along the border. Do we see that coming now in the immediate future as like as a rallying cry, or do we see real serious escalations?
Well, it's hard to say because Hamas is walking a very fine line right now. It's trying on the one hand to ease the suffering from Gaza, especially for the citizens who've been suffering over the last few years from the attacks, from the operations, everything that's been going on, especially now with COVID rampaging throughout the PA and, of course, Gaza. So it's hard to say that they'll go on that side, but on the other hand, of course, we have their perpetual promise to keep being the resistance against the occupation. But then again, there's also a third goal that, according to Ynet's reporter Owen Ben Ishai, actually said that one of the reasons that they're trying to do this is also to destabilize the PA, to make them look bad, and then, at the end of the day, make them look unreliable.
All right, well, we know that that's been a long goal of Hamas, especially leading up to and after possible elections.
Which were canceled pretty much over and all.
Which were canceled, but now they're talking about maybe bringing them back again, and of course that's a back and forth that is...
exactly.
Asaf, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Now, for our final story tonight, we move to the topic of justice, though in this case, justice may never actually be served. The Israel Supreme Court rejecting a lawsuit seeking to recognize Moroccan Jews who suffered under the Vichy state laws as Holocaust victims. Had these individuals been recognized as requested, they'd be entitled to state compensation under Israeli law, totaling some $123 million. But the courts ruled that while the Vichy and Nazi-aligned authorities did pass anti-Semitic laws, the Moroccan government had been doing the same on their own accord already. Therefore, Israeli Holocaust survivors' rights don't apply. With me to discuss the fallout of this decision, live from Rabat, Morocco, economic consultant and educator Amin Ayoub. Amin, it's great to see you again. Do you agree with the findings of the court?
I actually agree with the findings because historically it's been known that the late King Mohammed V actually protected the Moroccan Jews from the Vichy government. And this is actually known in history. I mean, the Vichy government actually pushed the late King Mohammed V to actually expulse most of the 250,000 Jews at that time and take them to Nazi camps. But the response of the king was, "I don't have Jews here. I have Moroccans," and this is actually very known among the Moroccan Jews, and they actually remember Morocco because of this.
So where does the basis of this of the plaintiff's argument, coming from? How many plaintiffs are there that were standing to benefit from from this lawsuit had they succeeded?
Well, according to the Israeli 2019 census, there are around 479,000 Moroccan Jews in Israel. But according to the Federation of Moroccan Jewry, it's almost 1 million Moroccan Jews or Jews with the Israelis with Moroccan descent who live in Israel. So I think the plaintiff, it's just a small minority who actually, a small minority of those Moroccan Jews. So
it sounds like it's a devastating ruling, to the plaintiffs, but altogether it sounds like, as a historian, as an educator, it sounds like you're saying that this is the right way to go.
Well, I think so because I know that for a fact that the Jews in Morocco were never treated as the Vichy or the Nazis wanted them to be treated, and they were always protected by the kings all along the history of Morocco.
All right. Well, Amin Ayoub, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight and tomorrow should be clear to partly cloudy and with slightly cooler temperatures than over the weekend. Lows tonight averaging at around 69 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow, temps rising a bit again to around 92 Fahrenheit or 33 degrees Celsius. And now before we go, let's see what's going viral here in Israel. Good party. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.2 shekels to the American dollar and 2.53 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, Chag Sameach again, and thank you so much for watching.